Transition in certain parts of the world will have huge impact on us, and then our discoveries here, geopolitics, the rise of China, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in Europe. So all sorts of big things are happening. The tectonic plates are shifting underneath us. We have to make sure that Namibia is ready and match fit for the next, thank you very much, for the next 30 years of economic development. And let's hope we can make it more successful in the next 30 years than we've made it in the last 30 years. And I might give Namibia sort of 5 or 6 out of 10 for the last 30 years, but that's just me. I don't know what people in the audience think. So we haven't done badly, but I think we could do a lot better. I've always believed that. This country has so much potential, so many good things going for it. I've always believed we're not fully exploiting those positives to really make a difference in the lives of everyone, not just a sort of privileged elite few in winter. Anyway, so let's launch onto the issue of natural resource governance, and I think I'd like to invite all 3 participants here to sort of give us a flavour of their thinking when it comes to this important subject. Just a sort of broad overview. How do they approach this subject? What issues are they looking at? What factors are they looking at? How do they think government should be handling the situation? So if I can ask you to kick off, you can take the microphone from me, and really just a very brief overview. You can make it specific to oil and gas. You can apply it to the whole mining industry or even the green hydrogen industry if you want. But what view do you bring to bear when you're looking at this issue in terms of how does the country maximise its benefits, and how do we get more people benefiting from these precious resources we have?
All right, good morning, evening everybody. My name is Kahuna, that was said. Just also to plug my book, I also wrote a book. It's titled Entrepreneurship Made Easy, Getting Started. So this book just gives you an overview of what to do if you're starting a business in Namibia, from a legal perspective, from how to get your products on the shelves, how to get customers, where to go look for funding if you're a startup and you don't want to incur too much debt. So all of that is in this book. So if any of you want to start entrepreneurship or know a cousin or somebody you want to give a book like this to, please, I'll let you do it. Basically, I feel like Namibia, we're in a very beautiful, opportune time right now. Vision to me is seeing the world for what it is and also for what it could be. And with what we have right now, we are at a very opportune time. We just have to know how to manage it and how to play in this game, and maybe we'll discuss those things a bit later on. But I really believe that we are at a very opportune time. We just have to give the people the opportunities, and maybe later we'll discuss how.
But do you want to not apply your thinking to, for example, the issue of oil and gas extraction and how Namibia goes about thinking about how it maximises the benefits from that?
So basically, what I'm saying, of course you're talking about oil and gas, but it could be the whole mining industry, and it could also include the hydrogen. My mindset, and I'm coming at it from more of an entrepreneur perspective. I've been hearing a lot of local content, jobs. And yes, jobs are beautiful, but Namibia has a 50% unemployment rate. So for me, common wisdom would be to create employers. And then the employers create the jobs. So we're focusing too much on creating jobs. Why don't we create employers? So that's my mindset. And how do we do that? So there are policies that I'm thinking should change, of course, but really the main thing is, so there are 7 groups. I thought maybe I was going to do a slide. I came ready prepared with my slide today. But there are 7 groups, but one of them for me will be preferential procurement is one of them. We need to create local businesses, and we need to tell these investors, look, if you are coming in Namibia, your suppliers have to be in Namibia, you have to partner up with other local people, and you don't take a raw product out of the country. You don't take why are you taking oil out of the country? Take out semi-finished oil or something. Take out buckets of Vaseline and go package them there. But you don't take a raw product out of the country. And these people that are going to produce these raw products have to be at least partly owned in Namibia. So that's my take on it.
Okay, thanks. Stefan, do you want to give us your initial thoughts?
I will. Thank you, Robin. So I haven't written a book yet. And maybe I thought just to explain how I ended up on the stage today. So Joe introduced me and said I work for Tribe Fire Studios, which is actually a media company that owns One Africa 99 FM. But my background, I'm a chartered accountant and I worked for PwC for many years. So one of the things that I did see today that I wrote, that I went to look at the Petroleum Taxation Act and I googled and there was a 2013 tax guide from PwC, a little booklet that I actually did to pull together back then. So I have that background in tax, and I think that's what landed me on the stage. Because on the group, I got brave and made some tax comments. But then currently, I am on the board of NAMRA, the Namibia Revenue Authority. I'm the deputy chair on there, so I have some involvement looking on the tax side of how we manage forward in terms of natural resources, and then I'm also involved with the NIPDB, where I'm on the advisory board there. I think with regards to our natural resources, for me, my position is it's important that we manage our natural resources so that it benefits all the citizens of our country. I think what is unfortunate, we've come through many years where we've extracted incredible wealth from the soil and from our country. And if we look at our Gini coefficient, but mostly if we look at the poverty levels in our country, and I saw some stats today again at PDB, there's a lot of poverty in our country. We haven't been able to take our natural resources and lift people out of poverty. So, in my position, I think it's very important that we use our natural resources to create a robust economy that can sustainably give people a livelihood. I don't think everyone should be millionaires, but nobody should be living in poverty. And everyone should have the opportunity to economically work themselves up and to build wealth for themselves and to have a decent livelihood.
Okay, that all sounds very nice, Hugo. Motherhood and apple pie, but the question is how we get there. Is our tax regime for the oil and gas industry match fit as things stand? Is it ready for the boom that we're going to experience? Is Namibia going to get enough of that revenue to be able to benefit, or are the cards stacked against Namibia and the money will all go to the foreign investors? What is your professional view, having written about it, even though you haven't written a book? I'm putting you on the spot here. You must be brutally honest.
That's fine. So if you look at the Petroleum Taxation Act, and that legislation was originally written on an international model and it aligned with a lot of other countries. I think it is a bit outdated, and currently there is a review being carried out within the Ministry of Finance to look at the Act specifically and some of the regulations around it. But the basis of it is that it provides for a 35% tax on petroleum activities. There's an additional profit tax if the profits become higher, which sort of has a sliding scale that it provides for an additional 5 to 15% tax, which means if guys are really making money, it could be 35 plus 15%, which is quite a bit of tax. On top of that, there is a royalty that is provided. So in the royalty, when you pay income tax, you can always manage that with the expenses that you claim. So if you don't make a profit, the government actually gets nothing. But a royalty is levied on the income that you get. So that's actually on the petroleum products that get sold. There's a 5% royalty that also comes to the government. So I think those are the specific taxes for the petroleum industry. From there, obviously, one looks at what are the industries that develop around that. You look at the people that are employed that will pay income tax. You look at the VAT that those companies will pay when they buy products in the country. And then obviously the other businesses that develop around that industry. I think,
okay.
For me...
Yeah, I mean, that's already very useful. But it sounds, from what you're saying, as if you think the tax regime is actually, pretty good at the moment. I know it's being reviewed, but you're generally quite happy with it.
Yeah, I think it has been in place, and there is a good regime.
Yeah.
We will certainly learn a number of lessons, and I think for me one of the concerns was if our people at the Revenue Authority actually have the experience to implement this. And yeah, I was in a meeting this week, and there's actually at the moment there are some of our people in Zambia being trained by one of the international organizations on it. And I believe it's ATAF, which is the International Tax Administrators Forum, that have actually just appointed very experienced tax people that work in oil and gas regimes elsewhere in the world as consultants to assist numbers. So in terms of capacity, there's a lot of support coming to us from international.
I found a quote from Minister Shimi, Finance Minister Shimi, that said, the government could end up getting over 60% of the, I think it's the profits from the oil and gas industry, given the current structure of the tax regime. Is that your reading of the situation?
So, yeah, well, Robin, I haven't done that sum, but I mean, if it's highly profitable, you can get to 50% of income tax, and you add the 5% royalty, which is on revenue, not on profit, when the amount of profit that is collected becomes quite substantial.
Yeah.
And then you've got the indirect taxes, or obviously the consumption taxes and the other employment taxes that add onto that. So the amount becomes significant.
Okay. I mean, personally speaking, I would like to see a demonstration of that calculation in public. I think that would be incredibly useful, and that could become, at the moment, the SACU revenue sharing formula is, according to my book, the most important formula in the Namibian economy, because SACU provides about a third of government revenue in this country. But this could be incredibly important, and I think to sketch it out with numbers, with scenarios, would be very illustrative for the general public as well. Okay, let me move on to Steve. Thanks a lot. Steve, give us your preliminary thoughts, and you don't have to confine yourself to oil and gas. You can talk about the whole mining industry at the moment, diamonds, non-diamonds, and even green hydrogen, where we don't have a clear tax regime yet, although we have the FIA that Hyphen aside with the government.
Great, thanks Robin. Perhaps just to start, I know it caused a little bit of confusion. I was introduced as the chair of the Namibian Institute of Corporate Governance. And as we're sitting here, there's a fireside conversation at Weinberg, and it's the third of three discussions on the same topic. And Robin and I were there last week to talk about the big P, the profit. The previous week, the first one was people, and we put people first for obvious reasons. And tonight is planet, so it's the triple bottom line, 3 Ps. And you will see all of that collated. In fact, it's being streamed at the moment. And if you go to the Institute of Corporate Governance site, you'll see all three of those discussions. We did this purposefully to sort of have as many people addressing this issue of the governance of natural resources as we possibly could. And this discussion will be collated with that, and it will all go into one sort of summary. So that's my pitch. And by the way, I've also written a book, but the book would be boring to you. It's the story of our family having been in Namibia for 100 years. So
it's a gripping tale. I can recommend it to you.
Very limited appeal, but it reminds me of our current president. I met him when he was Prime Minister 33 years ago. And when I met him again, when he became president, he said to me, "Are you still here?" I said, "Of course I'm still here." And Robert was one of those guys who came from the UK on the ODI fellowship, and I met him in '91. So the president, after 20 years, said to me, "You're still here?" I said, "Where would I be?" He said, "It's time you went home." And I was very insulted when he identified my home as the UK. So I've never forgiven him for that. So
Steve hates the UK.
Just to prove that we've been here, I've written a book on our 100 years here. So we're not just fly-by-nights.
You must give him a copy.
All right. So today, in fact, one of the newspapers found out that I'd been in the mining industry for 42 years and sent me a whole lot of questions that I must answer. and which will go into a supplement on the mining sector. So I'll start with mining. I joined government in 1992. I was a geologist and I was studying mineral economics, and the government obviously needed some advice on whether the mineral policies were appropriate. At that time there was no oil and gas, of course. There was gas, but it wasn't commercial. And I joined government to sort of look at the natural resources as it pertains to minerals, whether it was fair. I looked at all the contracts, Rossing, etc. I had, by the way, worked as a student at Rossing in my second year of university, so I didn't understand very much. But one of my first jobs was to look at Rossing's contracts and see whether there was a fair deal for Namibia. And by then, of course, the South African government had entrenched themselves into the Rossing shareholding, and there were some other shareholders, quite complicated. Ironically, 46 years later, I'm chairman of Rossing. So I'll sort of reflect on where we've come from that time and where we are now. And the same questions are posed again and again and again. Is it a fair deal in terms of benefits to all the stakeholders? And we posed on the 29ers a couple of questions. And this issue of ownership comes up again and again and again. And that's now expanded to not just minerals, but oil and gas and hydrogen, etc. And there's some very emotive issues here, rightfully so, because if you look at the ownership, and Andreas asked this pertinent question, who are the real owners? And I think the Constitution makes it very clear. The state is the owner of natural resources unless there's some other ownership arrangement. And of course, with minerals below the ground, the state is the owner. The state can license those mineral rights to investors, to Namibians, etc. And therefore, the government is the custodian of those resources, if you like, but the state is the owner, and it's on behalf of the people of the country. So the people own those resources. And there's been a lot of speculation now around oil and gas, that we only own 10%, etc. Obviously that's nonsense. We own, as Namibians, we own those resources. It's a question of striking a balance in the exploitation of those resources, because if you say, well, I own them, but I don't have the capacity to actually exploit them and beneficiate and all of that, then that ownership means nothing. So you've got to get to an arrangement where you bring in people with the expertise, with the money, etc., and you've got to have a fair deal. There have been a few references to the sort of what we call the government take, not the government stake, the government take. And if you add up all of these things in the oil industry, and I was part of the Minerals Act of '92, the Petroleum Production Exploration Act, and the Taxation Act. And we had very clever guys from the Commonwealth Secretariat who advised us on best global practice in 1992. And I think we did pretty well as a government to actually bring in the clever people to benchmark us globally and say, this is the deal. And this Petroleum Exploration Production Act and the Taxation Act that came after that, we felt was pretty competitive at the time. In fact, we had maybe ambitiously a 10% royalty. So we had the 35% tax plus additional profits tax one tier, and then another tier, plus the 10% royalty. If you added all of that up, you get in pretty close to 70% government take. Now that's an ideal situation, and it depends on the resource. 2 years later, I became part of the government negotiating team on diamonds. And we looked at Botswana as the most relevant example, and Botswana was getting 75% government take on their diamonds.
Is that on revenue or profits? What are you talking about?
Total. So that's when you add up all the resource rents, so that's royalties, top line, taxes, export duties, all of that, plus dividends. In the case of Botswana, maybe it didn't get dividends until 1994. When we negotiated that deal, we added all those up and we said, okay, 75% government take. If you add all of those, including dividends, that's a fair deal for Namibia. In fact, we thought it was quite ambitious. De Beers agreed. And that was what formed our views on the petroleum industry, because we said if we discover oil, it's likely to be good quality, if we develop it, it'll have to be good quality. So we sort of pitch at the same level that we would be in the sort of 70% range. If we count back now on diamonds 29 years ago, in fact, we did better than we thought we were doing. We went for 75, and if you count back, it's something in the order of 80%. Government take through all of those components. It's quite interesting. Nobody would have thought at the time that if you only left De Beers with 20% of the total pie, that they would stay here. Even at 20 to 25%, they stayed and they continue to invest here. That story is not known. I told the story at the Chamber of Mines yesterday. They said, why don't we tell that story? That in fact, government take on diamonds is 75% plus.
And what's the answer to that, Steve? Why don't people know that story?
I don't know. I suppose there was confidentiality at the time. But by now, the figures are there, and auditors can tell us exactly what the government takes been over 29 years. And the Chamber of Mines yesterday agreed to actually put that number out. Whether De Beers will allow that, I don't know. Whether the government will allow that, I don't know. But that was the conclusion from the Chamber. 20 years later, after independence, you will remember I was chairman of HUSAP Uranium. We then got an international commentator, Jim Otter, to come and compare again, as we had done after independence for the oil and gas sector, to compare the mineral sector, and Robin was very much involved with this. So Jim Otter did a global comparison on what the government take is in the mineral sector. And roughly it was this. In normal minerals, base metals, industrial minerals, etc., it was about 50% government take through taxes, royalties, etc., without dividends. So this is not an equity return, it's a resource rent return. 50% for normal minerals, and about 70% for precious minerals and precious metals. Precious metals in our case is only gold. In South Africa it's gold and platinum, etc. And precious minerals is diamonds. And he said that's where the world is, at about 70, so we were already at 75 for diamonds, which was a little bit high. And in the rest, all the other minerals, we were in the 50s. So we were okay. Gold, we were a bit low, and at the time, there was only one gold mine, which was only just making it, Navaja. We then had B2 Gold, which was very profitable. And there were moves to move the gold tax rate up, which were resisted, thankfully. So the general conclusion 10 years ago, let's say, 12 years ago, was that Namibia is pretty competitive, and the government has done pretty well in tapping the resource rent from a pure tax, royalty, etc. point of view. The oil and gas had been adjusted downwards because we hadn't found any oil, so the royalty went from 10 to 5. But the general impression was that Namibia was pretty competitive. The big question is, where does all that resource rent go? Does it really go to benefit the owners of the resource, which is the people of the country? And of course there we don't score very well, because our allocation of funding through budgets, etc., is not very efficient. There's lots of leakage, and there's a lot to do there. The last comment I want to make is this, that I think we started pretty well as a country, and we set up internationally competitive frameworks, but we've eroded that in the last 10 to 12 years through very poor licensing. So when one talks about the governance of natural resources, fish, we haven't talked at all about other resources. Fish is a perfect example of how we went wrong, and we allocated fish to political favors, etc., disastrous. We're doing the same with mining, we're doing the same with oil and gas, where we are selecting individuals and giving them preference. We are not honoring the ownership of those resources, which should accrue to all of Namibia, very importantly to future generations as well. And that's why the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is now being at least talked about and set up in theory, is so important, because we are exploiting resources, in the case of non-renewable resources, which belong to future generations. And if we don't give those future generations the benefit of the resources that we are taking today, then we are stealing from the future. And that's where I think we're going wrong now. We started, I think, quite well, and we're losing track now. And it's up to organizations like NIPDB, NAMRA, and others to get us back to proper governance.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I mean, I think the last two speakers have essentially defended the status quo. They've argued that our tax regimes are actually pretty good, they're competitive, they attract the investors, but at the same time, they give a good return to the country too. Let's just stay on that for a bit, but when I mix with ordinary Namibians, say, who aren't aware of the numbers and everything, there is an overwhelming view that we're being taken to the cleaners by international investors. They take out vast profits, leaving us with very little here. Why do we have, given that the tax regimes are essentially fair, have been constructed by international experts and people like you, Steve, and Hugo, why is this feeling so prevalent? Any responses there? Okay, Steve. If you want to take my mic, feel free. Or is that not? Am I just talking to the wrong people in the street?
No, I think you are absolutely right, Robin. And obviously there's a few considerations, and so what is driving this narrative? Obviously, when you get into the political space, sometimes there's some of the guys in the activist political space that keeps putting their finger into this thing to say, well, government is not managing the process. So, and I think we've had some very vocal activists that have gone wild on social media, that have made some sweeping statements.
But you're saying their statements aren't based on fact and analysis. This is just political rhetoric.
Well, a lot of it isn't, and I think that is the problem, that as the population, and unfortunately that is the downside of social media, where anyone can publish, anyone can record a video and say anything they want, and that thing runs like wildfire, and we all believe it. And then before you see, the confirmation bias in media, and if you've heard something enough times, we start believing it.
But why don't the companies and government just put the information out there? Why don't they say, look, we've invested X billion, we've made so much profit, we've paid so much revenue, isn't that a straightforward thing to do? Are they hiding something? I mean, when people aren't open about things, the natural assumption is they're hiding something, we're being taken to the cleaners, surely.
So are you saying they are not putting it out there?
Well, I haven't seen it. I mean, I've written a book on the Namibian economy, and I have no idea who's making money in fishing, a little bit idea in mining, but this economy is still, to me, a complete mystery, because I really don't know what's happening. Am I alone? maybe you have more numbers, but I certainly don't.
No, I don't have all the numbers, and obviously there's process for disclosures, and there are some mining companies that have produced very good annual reports and shown the contribution to the country.
Which ones? Just give me
To gold is an example.
To gold, right? There's one. Okay, but I mean, NAMDEB don't even produce a report anymore. That's the country's single most important company. We don't know the nature of the agreement the government has with De Beers. We don't see any profit and loss, annual financial statements. It's all just hidden in the Anglo-American website. And even there, I mean, you're a better man than me. I mean, you are a better man than me at these financial numbers. But can you tell me, how much Namibia's got out of the deal and how much De Beers has got out of the deal? I certainly can't tell.
No, I can't, Robin. I'm not going to venture there. Maybe Steve knows that answer. If I can just come back to my social media point,
Yeah.
I do think it is important for us in this conversation is to have these kinds of conversations, and I do think we have, with these sweeping statements and the stuff that goes around on social media, there is a lot of information which is not factually correct, that people are pitching in a certain way for a much different reason than necessarily for the benefit of the country. And I think we all need that awareness around it to sit in conversations like these and hear insights like Steve has given us now, and to get the truth on the table. Unfortunately, we are living in an era of misinformation that is driven by the social media platforms, and that's one of the biggest societal problems that I think we're dealing with now and the next generation will deal with. So we must think about it differently.
Social media has one explanation why we feel we're being ripped off. Today?
Okay, let me start with this. First of all, I think that our leaders did a good job in terms of what they could do, in terms of getting us independence, political independence that is. And I feel like we, the youth, have also a role to play now, and we have to stand up and fight for economic independence. But for you to create a future, you must understand the past. So if you go back and look at the past, so what colonialism did, it cut off some people's legs, right? Let's begin there. So black people's legs were cut off, and really, Namibia is too small for us to divide and conquer. And even as I'm talking now, I'm not talking like, no, we should separate or whatever. I actually feel like if we come together, we can take over Africa. So that's actually my thought. But so what happened is that now and then, with the effects of what that whole colonialism thing is like, imagine like a big mountain and people are like in this big hole there at the bottom. And at the bottom of that mountain, you get the grassroots people. These are people that don't even have basic toilets, basic roads. I mean, just a toilet to go to in this cold winter. We have to stand up and go behind a bush at night. And we have that in Windhoek. In Windhoek, 40% of the people are in the informal settlement. And then on top of that, you have the blue-collar people. And these people take care of all of that whole people. And then on top of that, you have the white-collar, which is now the middle class. And then you have the elite. And when now, if you are now pulling all of Namibia from that mountain, and you only throw down one rope, that rope is only going to end here at the elite. So the elites are the people that have proximity to power. They can influence things, they can change things. So those ropes will only catch them. And they will take those ropes and will put themselves out and will put their families out. So that's why we have to throw down more ropes and different ropes. And that's why for me, preferential procurement is one of the greatest tools that we could use to do that. So if you now then, preferential, there are phases to it. And phase one is always the elites, right? But if you go back and you throw down more ropes and different ropes and learn from the first time, if you look at the history of South Africa, the guys that got the first ropes in 1994 are the billionaires in South Africa now, the black billionaires. But as it kept going and they kept tightening the screws of preferential procurement, as more millionaires were made from that. So I think that, yes, we are making a lot of money, but the money isn't going down to the people at those grassroots level. So they will say we are being taken to the cleaners. They will automatically say that. So now, number one, of course, there has to be that accountability, that openness. Where is the money? That has to be answered. And once we discover that money, how do we take it down to those people at the bottom? And how do we pull all these different people out? How do we pull them out? And like I said, we are only 3 million, if I'm now exaggerating, if I round it off. We are 3 million. And with all the resources that we have, come on, we could really be something else. So those people are not, they don't see these numbers and they don't hear this type of talks. They are thinking about, what am I eating for dinner? Now to go to that person and tell them, no, we are getting 80%. 80% of what? So that's what they will ask you. Where is this 80% that you are talking about? Yes, the government has done a great job, but we now must rise and take it further. So yeah, that's my
Okay. I think that's a very practical explanation. More ropes, more local procurement. Steve, do you want to give your explanation to me why we feel we're being ripped off, given the glowing assessment you've given of Namibia's mining tax system?
I mean, that's exactly the conversation we had at the Chamber of Mines yesterday. And the conclusion was that both the Chamber and the government is at fault in not disclosing exactly what the contributions are and what this government take versus the investor returns are. So there has to be an agreement on how that information is put out there. The reality is, and if you go back 40, or let's say 33 years, that most mining operations have contributed at least 50% of resource rent to the government. What the government does with that money is not nearly as transparent. Now, there have been a few really standout mining companies, and I'll talk about other companies as well. Rossing, way before independence, was doing the most amazing work right throughout this country. And the sort of cynics say, well, it was because they were illegal miners. And you'll remember that Swapo in exile tried to stop Rossing from mining because they said they weren't authorized to mine. So some say they were overcompensating because they really shouldn't have been here. But if you look at the Rossing Foundation, what they did in the first 14 years prior to independence, they were all over this country. And a lot of our leaders were educated by Rossing in the country and outside. So that was a standout company, and is again a standout company now, doing the most amazing work again, now that it's gone back into a profitable situation. CDM, De Beers were similar, and recently B2Gold became that company. It's ironic that the other day, B2Gold put out an advertorial, and advertorials are never taken seriously because it's what you say about yourself. And I think you made the comment that this must be put in context as to what proportion of the money they made actually went into what I regard as discretionary tax. They decided that they were going to put 40 million into COVID, they put 30 million into rhino conservation, etc. So they went way above the norms, and they became the Rossing, if you like. Now the mine is going to close down over the next few years, and of course, as good as mines are, and as good as their contributions are to social upliftment, when they close, they take people back to where they were before, unless there's a foundation that's set up for post-closure, etc., which they are doing. So we've got to sell our story a lot better, and we've got to communicate much better with government, because government creates this narrative that the mines are simply offshoring, are transfer pricing, etc. And the other night on the...
Is there no evidence for that at all, Steve?
I haven't seen any blatant evidence, and it's ironic that when the high-level panel, which I think Stefan was on, your boss was on it at least, and I had this argument with her because Nangula Wanja made the statement that there's a lot of transfer pricing, and from her position as PwC managing partner, I said to her, do you really have evidence for that? Because I don't really see it. The mining industry has been through tough times, and there weren't profits to offshore in many cases. And she said to me she's seen it. And I was very controversial. I said, you're part of the problem then. If you didn't blow the whistle on transfer pricing, you're part of the problem. The same issue was raised the other day at FNB. FNB said to us in Institute of Corporate Governance meeting, what should we do when we see people doing bad stuff, transfer pricing, etc.? And I said, you have the same responsibility that the auditors do and that we would have in the Institute of Corporate Governance, to blow the whistle on anybody that is doing bad stuff. We have a collective responsibility as Namibians to flush out bad practice. And we've tried to do that in this 29ers group. And we might talk about some of those companies later. But I don't think there's a sort of an industry scale transfer pricing happening, because the mining sector has been through ups and downs. Now, a few companies are making good money. And now the auditors, the banks, but more importantly government, should be seeing that the contracts that anybody signs are arm's length contracts, and that we're getting fair price. The government is the custodian of that fair pricing. And to the extent that auditors and banks, etc., can help that process, it must happen. But there's the famous Mbeki report, which suggests that there's gross transfer pricing across Africa, and Africa is being plundered. I think that is right in the rest of Africa. I think Namibia probably the worst, the least plundered country in that respect. I think it is very common in countries like DRC, Zambia, etc. And there's lots of information on that, lots of books written. But I think Namibia is relatively innocent of that because we don't have the same sort of rich resources where you can hide lots of profits, etc., which has happened in the rest of Africa.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Steve. I mean, it does beg the question, if this ripping off is taking place on a huge scale, why aren't companies being investigated? Why has no action been taken? I'm not aware of much action. I think there might have been 3 cases of transfer pricing that I'm aware of from the NAMRA side over the years. But if it is so vast, why aren't we investigating this? Why aren't we clearing out the stables? So that's my question. Let me move on a little bit now to the question of ownership, because we talked about tax, really. I know you talked about local procurement as well. We'll come on to that too. But isn't the question of ownership intimately tied up with this feeling that we're being ripped off, and that we feel if we're owners, co-owners of these companies, then the chances are we know the numbers, we know what's going on, and the chances of being ripped off are much reduced. Now I put that forward to get a reaction from you. I have to say again though, that we own 50% of NAMDEB, and still all my friends say we're being ripped off by De Beers. So, you know, whatever you do, you can't seem to win. So I'd like to hear your views on this. Steve, you can start this time, and then we'll be left with it.
Yeah, so, you know...
Is ownership important, essentially? And if so, whose ownership? Local shareholders? Or
I don't think so. I think in the case of De Beers, it was important. And I had mixed feelings at the time. I wasn't sure that ownership was going to deliver this very preferential government take that I've talked about. But it was a de-risked company. Everybody knew what the situation was. Everybody knew how profitable it was. And I think we were in a strong negotiating position. So we managed to get all of what we wanted, really. So ownership has worked very well in the case of diamonds. In the case of Rossing, I'm not so sure. And Rossing, the Namibian government inherited this 3% stake which the South African government had. The other 15%, which was held through IDC, stayed with IDC. And we, in fact, as bankers, tried to finance that stake into government's hands. We tried to buy that stake and fund it, and somehow that didn't work out. So we thought at the time that would be more meaningful to have 18%.
Okay, but I suppose what I'm asking is, does the fact that government owns some of these companies, co-owns, reduce the risk of being ripped off, or at least reduce the perception that we're being ripped off?
Well, it might reduce the perception, but I don't think it reduces the risk. I think government has full rights to get whatever information they want, and that was my first job at Independence. Getting all the contracts, getting all of the financials and so on, and seeing that Namibia was getting the right deal.
So just to be clear, that government could go to any mining company and say, show us your books, we want to convince ourselves we're getting what's due.
Of course, yeah. So, and I think it was distinguished between free carry, which was the De Beers situation, government got free carry because we negotiated that, the Rossing situation, which is free carry, from a situation
Can you
where...
explain to people what free carry means?
So free carry means you don't pay for your shares. We negotiated 50% of De Beers to transfer into the hands of government. Now, at the time it seemed impossible that De Beers would just give this up. But soon after independence, it was realized that up to 20% of the diamonds were being stolen on site. So there was a massive leakage. And one of the commitments that government made in this deal was that they would really see that there wasn't this sort of pilferage and leakage of diamonds. So that was a free carry. Rossing was not paid for by government. The South African government might have paid something, I'm not sure, but our government didn't pay anything for that. The subsequent deals where government became a shareholder, and Husab was one, I was chairman of Husab. After I left Husab, government negotiated a 10% stake in Husab. And it was a very bad deal.
And that wasn't free carry?
It wasn't free carry. They paid full value, and they paid an exorbitant interest rate. So the reality is that government will probably never get any dividends out of that Husab deal. They did a similar deal with Navachab, etc. So the deals over the last 12, 15 years, in my view, have not been good deals. And the deals that we're negotiating now, Recon Africa, for example, was free carry, 10% by NAMCOR. I think it was a disastrous move by government to take 10% in a company that is absolutely creating huge reputational risk for all shareholders. I think the hydrogen story is very ill-advised. Whether they get free equity, which makes the investment that much more unpalatable for investors, or whether they pay for the equity at this early stage when we don't know what it's worth, if anything. I think those deals are going to come back and bite us. So my general view is that government, unless they get a carried interest for strategic reasons, I don't think government should be taking risk on financing themselves into projects which they don't understand.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That was very clear and I think very well explained. I would just say before we move on this, people often look at mining is a funny business. I've worked a lot in the chamber and everything, but people always tend to look at the success stories when a company is making lots of money. That attracts attention, and that then stokes this feeling that we're being ripped off. But no one really looks at companies that go for many, many years without making money, making huge losses actually, which their shareholders have to bear. So it's a rather distorted picture that people see, and you have to see the whole picture across the cycle, I think. I just thought I'd add that. Hugo, do you want to say something about this business of ownership and whether owning mining companies or natural resource companies makes a difference to their performance, their tax performance, and public perceptions?
Yeah, Robin, I agree with Steve, and my head is in the same space. I don't think government is necessarily a good shareholder. I think in terms of getting benefits from natural resources, what you have in terms of taxes and royalties is a much stronger right, and the right to have insight into what is happening in those companies. And I think government should play in that space. The other thing that also becomes very murky, if government is a participant in the market, and on the other hand, it's the regulator or the one with the responsibility to say there has to be fair play on how this is handed out and how everyone plays, and that role becomes compromised the moment that government becomes a shareholder. And the experience that we've had from state-owned enterprises, I think it's a big problem in our economy, where we still have some public enterprises that government owns that's actively competing with the private sector and using taxpayer money to do it. Is a problem. And especially Robin's point is, if you go through the cycle of a company and when you are investing or the company is in trouble, it's taxpayers' money that goes in. And if the people are not negotiating well in these deals that Steve was talking about, that's taxpayers' money and it's the next generation's money that goes in. So in summary, my point is I think government should sit at a higher level as a regulator with that responsibility to manage resource on behalf of the population, and to use the rights and the legislation that we have to extract monetary benefit through tax and not through dividends.
Okay, thanks. So do you want to add anything to that? And even completely disagree?
No, I agree with them on the side that the government shouldn't own, but a part of it must be Namibian owned. I believe in that 100%. So the government should push Namibians to own the mines. They should help Namibians to own the mine in whatever way they can, but they themselves shouldn't own it. And I'm going to give an example of companies like Google, for example. Google, the American government takes these companies. Okay, you guys have something almost nice, something pretty. We are going to be your client as the government, and then we pay you all the money for this service. And then this company uses that money to develop themselves into a world player. But the government doesn't own that, but they help that person, and that's how they develop their country. And then this company becomes a big company, starts employing people in their country, and all of this benefits. And then our governments come, no, we only use Google products, you must be at this standard. But Google didn't start at that standard. but the government helped them out. So I think we should take a similar approach to mining as well. We take some guys, okay, you are doing mining, okay, the banks get behind him. Can you give some small shares to this community since that mine is in that community? Okay, we as the government will give you some small money as well, and then we support that. And people like Dangote in Nigeria, that's what happened to them. And now they are world players as well. So the government mustn't own, in summary, but it must be to an extent Namibian owned. And I think 51% is fair.
51%. So does that mean they put in 51% of the equity capital when the mine or whatever it is, when the mine starts off?
Yes, they have to put up the 51%. The government, like I say, can help raise the 51%. The local banks can help raise the 51%. If that's what it takes for us to play at that level, then we have to help. And they themselves must also come with some sort of money of some sort as well. But yes, they put up money. And if you look at the phases of, there are 4 phases. It's always like that. So like I said, in the beginning, it will always be the elites. But if you empower the people a little bit down the chain, down the value chain, then those people, one of the controversial things that I was thinking, I was thinking that even if Namibians get money in the pocket, like if I'm an owner, right? I'm a Namibian, so I own these things accordingly. Why can't I get money from that? Let's say they say that the oil and gas is $30 billion US, right? And then they say, okay, from this $30 billion, we're going to take $1 billion US and we're going to give every Namibian $1 million. I know it's controversial. Maybe we can do it every 5 years, or we even do it once. And then these guys that are in the small scale mining can then take their $1 million and form a consortium. And say, okay, from this my million, I'll put 500,000. 50 of us, let's do that. Let's buy a processing plant. Let's process what we need. So if there's more money being available in the economy from our resources, if there's more money being available in the economy, we will then invest that money in the economy back. I know people are saying that, no, the people will be lazy, but all of these people here, you guys are Namibians, you are not lazy, you are here on this cold night, and your friends probably think the same way you think too, so what will make us lazy? So, but yeah, so that's my thought.
Fish.
Okay, thanks for that. Fish, yeah. We can talk fish, I'm not stopping anyone from talking fish. Okay, so just to finish off the issue of ownership, I'd like to ask Steve, because we have some experience of this, not only Namdeb, not only Rossi, not only a few other things, but we had the Sismin Fund way back, which was supposed to promote, I think, all sorts of things in the mining industry. We've had Ipangelo now for over a decade, which holds stakes in companies, and we've had the experience of Ongopolo as well, which was a Namibian mining company. We don't have that many other Namibian mining companies of scale. I wonder if you could just give us your reflections on those 3 sort of initiatives that have happened over the last 30 years.
Yeah, so let's start with Sismin. Sismin was a European Union fund that was triggered because of the demise of uranium. Uranium plummeted to $10 a pound, and our very important Rossing mine couldn't make a profit. And Sismin was an attempt to diversify the mining industry and get other pillars of the mining industry going. And it was very sort of idealistic, I suppose, and it was at the time quite a lot of money, 200 million, that was put into a whole lot of marginal mining operations or exploration operations, some drilling, and then some geophysical surveys to try and promote the exploration of the country. The management of Sismin stayed wholly within the Ministry of Mines and was done very badly. So there was almost no payback on Sismin. Even those companies that did make a profit after the Sismin intervention, virtually none of it came back. It was supposed to go into a thing called the Mineral Development Fund, and that was supposed to be a revolving fund to keep supporting development of the industry. So that was largely a failure. The successful part was the exploration, the aerial surveys that were done, which actually created discoveries like Beetle Dog later. So that was very successful. But the interventions to smaller marginal operations really wasn't very successful, including lithium, by the way. Ongopolo was said...
Sorry, Steve, but why wasn't it successful?
Because it was managed in the Ministry of Mines, and there was no real accountability on those paybacks. When you set up something like that, you need an independent board of directors that manage it separately, and that was never done. Ongopolo was then set up. I don't know why it was so long in coming, because the Ongopolo blueprint was devised in exile. And the people that were sent off to study mining, including the CEO of Ongopolo, the Diamond Commissioner, and the Mining Commissioner, was sent off to the best schools in the US to study mining and geology, etc. And they came up with this idea of Ongopolo. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Epangelo. Because there was one of the scenarios was that the mining industry would collapse after independence, and the incoming government would have to get in and run all the mines. Now that didn't happen, obviously, thankfully, and the mines continued. Some South African companies pulled out, but other companies came in. So long after, I think 18 years after independence, suddenly we had this Epangelo thing, which just didn't work. It didn't have any relevance at all way into independence. So that has been a total failure in my view. Ongopolo was an attempt to save a mine that was going bankrupt. And it was well intended, but clearly the GIPF was misled into funding something that wasn't viable at the time. And that failed as well. The one success story of a Namibian ownership, I suppose, is B2Gold, which we were part of. We funded an empowerment group into B2Gold.
Who's we now?
The bank.
You have many we's.
The bank. Nedbank at the time, and then RMB. So we created Heavy Mining, which was an indigenous mining group that was looking at diamonds, looking at gold, etc. We financed it. They raised some money themselves, and they did extremely well. In hindsight, I'm not sure if I'm proud of that or not, because it turned out to be a few people who did extremely well out of it. I would much prefer, in hindsight, to have had a regional grouping of grassroots people who would have been more sort of engaged in the mine, recruiting labor, providing services, local content, and when the mine closed down whenever it closes, were set up to do alternative activities. So I think that was a success for some. B2Gold was happy that they had a partner and that they could tick the box. But I think it was a partial success. I think it would have been better to put those dividends into a regionally based grassroots group that could continue post mine life. So that's been given as a success, but I'm not so sure. The Epangelo investments, so-called investments in Navaja, Busav, etc., I think are destined to fail. I think they're failing already, and I don't think that's a success story at all.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I mean, I think you've just reinforced a feeling that I hold very strongly, very dear, which is why I wrote this book on the guide to the Namibian economy, because my view is history is full of examples that we can learn from, good and bad. It's not all successes, it's not all failures. And we should be looking back at all the things we've done and saying, drawing the lessons, what did we do right here, what did we do wrong? I think that's exactly the approach we need to adopt. So these issues aren't new. The ones we're talking about, we were talking about them at independence. But we've now got experience. We know what does work, what doesn't work, what might work better, what might not work so well. So another plug for my book. Okay, let's move on. I don't know how long 29ers meetings go on for, but I was going to move on to the issue of beneficiation. We'll come on to local content as well, because this is, again, always in the public discourse. And the question is, people say, yes, everything should be processed in Namibia, of course, before it's exported. We're exporting all these raw minerals. So, Jose, do you want to kick off on that one? I mean, you've already expressed a view, but do you want to give some examples, perhaps, of where you think, we're missing a trick as a country, where we could be adding more value and therefore creating jobs and things, better export earnings and things? please just give us your view.
So what I think is, okay, so I studied in India, and one of the beautiful things that I saw in India, they don't have industrial areas. In Namibia, you come to a classroom and you see a chair, or you go everywhere, you see finished products. In India, you walking past a house, they start making it, when you're coming back from the shop, they're done. You realize that it's actually easy to make things. That's one of the things that blew my mind about India. It's like, and then from then on, my eyes opened. I started to look at lights, fans. I said, these are very easy things to make. And then the one time I had a revelation, and I was like, if I can learn how to drive a car, and I can learn how to fix a car, then I can learn how to bring a machine that makes something. Like the one time I saw them making pepper, and it was like they just took seeds, put it in a machine, crushed it, and it came out pepper. Now all my life, all I saw was just a white pepper packet. Like it's a finished product. When I saw how easy it is to make, I was like, wow, this is our jobs. This is how we get our people out of poverty. And so for me, I believe that, so when they put up a mine, they shouldn't hide these things from us. How to process diamonds or anything, whatever you are processing. Show it to us, and then show us how to run this machine, and then teach a few people how to fix this machine if it's broken, and then you have an industry. And Namibia is not necessarily a market. We have 2 million people, but the world is. Africa is a market. So if the people come and say, no, if you are going to get a license here and you're not willing to set up a processing plant, we can't give you this license. I'm sorry. They will make a plan. They will make a plan. They will put that. And then you say, you must put local ownership of that license as well. They will make a plan. And then not only that, they support industries to that. These things that they are making need logistics. They need to be transported. They need to be packaged. So these are all other industries that will just be popping up everywhere. Just if we could just get this one thing right. So bring the machinery, we'll learn how to use them. It's not rocket science. You tell me, press this button. Oh, okay. And press the button. No, don't do it that way. You have to do it after 20 minutes. Oh, okay, sorry. 20 minutes. No, now you cost us 20,000. Oh, I'm sorry. We learn. We bumped cars before. We did that. No, here we are. We learn.
You're doing great. You might be sacked after losing 20,000. Maybe not. Okay, Hugo, do you want to give us your thoughts on beneficiation?
In principle, I think we should be pushing to beneficiate as much as we can from the raw materials that we have. And yeah, of course, it is a valid point. So does government interfere with legislation or in a contract to force someone to beneficiate? And I think that's very relevant in some cases. Obviously, the considerations are one in terms of the skill set. So when I was in IPDB today, and the survey that they did, it's one of the biggest complaints that investors have is that they say, well, we will appoint the millions. These ads are out. We don't have people with the skills, and I think that's a big issue that we need to address. To say if we want to beneficiate, we really need to be very actively focused to build the skills so that we have the people in the country that can do that. Obviously, the other factor that has to do with that, and that you often hear, is where people say, well, to put up some processing plants, you need volumes of a certain amount, and we're just not producing enough volumes in the country. So I think that is just, and it's definitely valid in some cases. In some cases, it might be an excuse. But when one thinks about it, that is obviously an important thing to consider, and just look at the different industries and different natural resources and say, is it commercially viable with the volumes that we are producing in Namibia to beneficiate it here? So some will have to let slide, but some, yes, we do need to push for. And then we need that entrepreneurial spirit of Namibians who say, well, I want to learn and I'm wake up about what is happening in the industries around me, what are the business opportunities, and how can we push to build businesses around beneficiation.
Okay, but give me a clear example of a mineral that we're producing in this country could be processed further here in Namibia that isn't.
I'm not a miner, Robin. You have to ask that question.
That's a bit of a cop-out, you know, I think. Okay, Steve, I'll ask the same question of you, because I go to a lot of these meetings where there's a lot of airy-fairy talk about this and everyone's complaining about everything. But when you bring it down to it, you know, are we going to process uranium further? Are we going to process gold further? Are we going to process fluorspar? Where are we going to process fluorspar further? You know, we need to get concrete about these things. And it's all very well sitting in a meeting like this saying we should process more, but what are we going to process and how are we going to do it?
Yeah, so this came up in the negotiation on NAMDEB, where one of our requirements on that negotiation was that we process 10% of Namibia's diamonds in Namibia. Namibia said, all right, we'll try, but at the time there weren't skills, obviously it had never been done before, but they tried. And they set up the Kahuna processing cutting factory, which didn't work. Maybe because the beers didn't really commit to it, maybe because government was really managing it and didn't do it efficiently. Somebody else took it over later and it didn't work again. Now Namibia is taking it over, so not sure that that's going to work either. So you've got to be realistic, and you can't simply force people to beneficiate. Uranium is the one which has been very topical for a long time. And in fact, as chairman of Rossing the other day, our uranium oxide shipments were blocked for 4 months, and we went to see the minister. And the mining commissioner piped up and he said, no, only if you go to the next stage, which is uranium hexafluoride. Now, 12 years ago, as chairman of HUSAP, we looked very seriously at trying to go to the next stage. And what we found 12 years ago was that if you go to uranium hexafluoride, which is the next stage, you get into a very, very limited market niche. And you only add about 3 or 4% value for a lot of cost. So you actually destroy a lot of value. Now, the ministry has had 33 years of learning to work out that you can't simply go to uranium hexafluoride, but they seem to not get that. Eventually the minister overruled them and said, please let these guys' uranium go. In the industrial minerals area, I think there's a whole lot of potential. Salt, it's not high value, but you go to Taiwan, as we did 30 years ago. Taiwan, with half the quantity of salt production, has 30 times the value of our salt production. Half of it. So there's a 60 times value add of salt. Salt, you can make chemicals and pharmaceuticals and all sorts of things. And it's a crime to me that we haven't forced that to happen in the salt business. And the answer we've always given is the salt goes to South Africa because the owner is in South Africa and it's for hydrochloric acid in South Africa. That's not an excuse for me. Lithium now. We've gone and we've blocked all lithium and any other similar mineral from being exported, which is just crazy. We can't just go and block exports. We should have by now determined the value chain in lithium and said, this is your mining license condition. If you're going to mine lithium, you're going to go at least to this stage. Industrial minerals are quite easy to beneficiate beyond ore, and to allow export of lithium ore is simply crazy. We should never have done that. We now go and we say, we cancel your mining license. It's illegal. You can't just go and cancel a mining license, but you can stop the exports of lithium ore. You can do that as a condition. So I think there's quite a lot of scope and job creation ability in the industrial mineral sector, in what we call in our critical minerals. But in our core product, diamonds, uranium, I think there's limited scope to actually add value. But we need experts to come in and define those value chains and create those opportunities for the minerals.
Okay, thanks, Steve. But what you were saying about salt seemed to contradict what you were saying about ownership. You suggested that salt wasn't being processed in the way that the Taiwanese are doing because this was some sort of South African subsidiary that was vertically integrated with companies in South Africa. So doesn't that somewhat contradict what you were saying?
Well, I'll tell you what I would have done if I was the minister. I would have allocated an adjacent piece of land to a Namibian company to do salt, because it's very easy to do salt. And I would have created that competitive tension, because we're in the hands of a South African company that has hydrochloric acid, pool acid offtake in South Africa. you can't go and say to them, give up your shares or sell or whatever. In fact, we did an empowerment deal there as well as a bank, and we brought in the Namibian shareholders 10%. But they've never tried to expand that product. So what I would have done is created tension there and said there's more space to do salt. Let Namibians do it and let them do all the pharmaceuticals and chemicals and all of that stuff to create that competitive tension. And I would do exactly the same in lithium. There's lots of lithium around it. I would look at proposals for mining licenses based on what they're going to do with that product. A company exporting a 1% lithium product should not have got a mining license. And having got one, the condition should have been changed to say you could export for 3 months or 6 months, then you stop, then you add value.
Okay, thanks. We could go on and on, so I wanted to sort of wrap up on, in terms of, well, I wanted us to finish on the subject of local procurement and stimulating new Namibian businesses, but I don't know how much time we've got. I mean, so I find it absolutely fascinating, everything we're talking about this evening, that people have got homes to go to. Should we just open the floor? Should we open the floor to questions? Okay. Roving mic. Do you want to use my one?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Cipriano. I run Cipriano Group of Companies. Currently positioning ourselves to buy dormant tender premium businesses at 75% and manage the 25% risk. I'm also writing a book titled Why Namibians Must Be Rich. So it's in the phases of a memoir right now. My question perhaps is not one that can be quickly answered, and it stems from the root of attitude. Like in school, everybody always spoke about attitude. Attitude, you have this attitude, that kind of attitude. I feel overall, as a country, the attitude is such that we have this approach of, I believe, the most bad advice I've ever had in my life. The worst advice anybody could have ever given me was, it's not that easy. When you think about it, this is kind of advice you get almost in every home, business sectors and whatever, but just as my friend here, Jose, is actually a good friend of mine, pointed out, his experiences being in India, goes one way, comes back, and he sees paper is done. It's a finished product. Well, is that easy? However, the attitude, the way I see how this key players, uranium, diamonds, gold, this, everybody is so, helpless in this, but nobody really takes that attitude of saying, look, let's just put the task and let's do the work, because it's really that easy. So many times people have this fantasy, if I was the president, if I was this guy, if I was that guy, if I had this, why not just pull people together and just do it? So I want to ask, maybe you can help me understand, perhaps I can also include this in my book once again. And why do we have this attitude of, it's not that easy? That's my question. Why is this attitude at large? Thank you.
A few other questions as well.
Hello, my name is Robert Freeman. I'm a visitor. I live in New Zealand, from New Zealand. I currently live in London. I just want to say, first of all, what a fantastic panel this has been, because I've learned so much in really a very short amount of time. I have an idealistic question. And in terms of oil and gas, my personal point of view is that the time of burning what remains of the dinosaurs is on the slide. And given that what we know about what that does to the planet, However, I'm a realist, and I understand that oil products have value and will have value for some considerable amount of time. But what also is being done, thought of in this country about what's the next thing when the oil is gone, or when the market for the oil is gone? And also similarly, because it's been talked about, what do we leave for future generations in terms of regulation for being able, after wealth has been extracted in other ways, minerals, how do we ensure that we are not left with a big polluted hole in the ground?
Hi, I just have like a tangent question. So it's actually a pretty conversation that I had with a bunch of my colleagues in the morning. It was more on the nationalism that Namibians have, especially like my generation. And however, the trick is, and the question is, when does a win-win occur? Because when you look at the whole previous transactions or deals that have occurred in the past few years, is that there hasn't necessarily been a thing of where the Namibian nation has won some contractual agreements or so, from the way I've seen it. However, the other question actually now stems to the question of, if you look at the way capitalism just works in general, is that people do not necessarily win, but it's usually the investor or the capitalist or the owner of some sort that actually wins the transaction. And that now stems back to the Director General of the WTO. She also mentioned, she actually had a very strong comment on how trade occurs in general, that there will always be like a winner and a loser in every transaction. Now, coming back to this scenario is, when do you actually define a win-win scenario? When do you define something is a win-win case? When you find that Namibians want to be nationalists. However, you find investors that obviously want to invest as well. And then you find that Namibians want some high FDI rate, or like, FDI stands for foreign direct investments. So Namibians want humongous amount of investors to come in Namibia. But at the same time, there are like conflicted interests between two parties. So the question is, when do you define it? What do you find a win-win scenario?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for that panel. I listened attentively to your and I talk about mining and also get the big numbers. I listened to the input of the panelists. We've done a good job, but I'm really big concerned. You spoke at length about governance of our mineral resources. Yet you spoke about great examples of the Recon project, the HUSA, then you talk about the green hydrogen. Here you seem to talk about the benefit to the state, but then we also know that when the Eastern Mine closed, the people were left out in the desert, the Daudas area. We also know what happened to Rosing a few years ago with regard to the people at Arandes. Nothing was left behind in at that time. We are also aware what happened at Oranienburg, when they were downscaling of operation. The Oranienburg town was almost a ghost town. What is going to happen now to Otavi and Chualoko with B2 Gold closing? When, yes, we are hearing that a lot goes into the pocket of the state, but how about the people on the ground? Where the impact is severe, where the country completely turned upside down because of mining activities. My question is this. I always have thought that governance is informed by the strategy on mining, on minerals. Is our strategy on mineral really correct? Or does it really need to have a review? That's now to everybody who would like to take on the challenge. Thank you.
Okay, let's come back to the panel then. We've got 4 very good questions. In response to it's not that easy. After oil, economic nationalism, and is it possible to create a win-win situation with investors? And finally, have we got our governance and our mining strategy right in terms of what happens to these population centres that get built up around a mine when the mine ends up closing. So I'm happy for you to take any of those or all of them if you've got something interesting to say on any of them. Jose,
I think they're all intertwined. Okay, so the attitude, mental transformation, the law of mental transformation. A student comes out of grade 12, and then they go through 7 years of school, they come out a doctor. What changed in those 7 years? They were subjected to information, they were subjected to teaching, and that information and that teaching made them a doctor. That's the law of mental transformation. You put information in your brain, it transforms your brain and you become somebody else. So the attitude is just mental transformation. So when it comes to the win-win situation, so in my book there are 3 types of deals. There's a win-win, which is the best type of deal. Then there's the win-lose, which is the worst type of deal. And then there's a lose-lose, which is like a middle ground. I gain something, but I also lose something. I'm not completely happy, but I'm not completely sad either way. So that's a type of deal. So depending, like he said, we just look at everything that we have. We have 30 years of experience. This deal, can we really do something here locally? Can we process it here? No, we can't process it here. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, it doesn't make sense, so we move on. What's the next best thing? Okay, can we invest in the local community then? From the money that you make, part of your profit, can you then invest in the local community? And I really don't understand why we are poor. It's like, okay, I have my own reasons for it, but we shouldn't be poor. All right? This is Namibia. If you just take the northeastern part, Kavango region, Katima Mulilo region, and you give them, and this is also to answer the question of after oil. So if you take the money from all of these resources, then you invest them in the people and in those towns. So how do you invest those towns? This part here, we have water, we have land. We have fertile land, we have water. That's Nile, that's how Egypt was built. That's how Mississippi is built. Make food. Provide the food for SADC, provide the food for Africa. Namibia is an office, it's a lab. We test the food here, it takes nice years. Okay, send it to the world. Or sell it to Africa at least. Make food. You come down here to the middle where the Herero people are, they have all this cattle, cheese factories, glue. I mean, everybody knows how many products you can make from a cow. All these people have all this, they have cattle and they have land on top of that. Make a whole industry just like Texas. Copy what the people are doing in Texas. You go down to the south, green hydrogen or this whole energy transition. A lot of open land, good sunlight, good wind, and whole other industries being built there. You come to this area in the Ovambuland areas, we have a lot of people there. These people become the support industry, logistics, packaging, all of this. And that's after oil. And then if you build a mine, you build a processing, what is limiting you to process raw materials from other African countries? To get a small-scale license in Zimbabwe is $2,500 US. To get the big one is $25,000 US. So you process Namibian gold. Once it's finished, you start buying gold from other African countries. Why are we limited? Why can't we process gold like the people in the West are processing gold? So after a while, build industries that can sustain the country after that. It's not rocket science.
Okay, not rocket science. Hugo. Happy to comment on all or one or two.
Thank you, Robin. So, yeah, I think on the first question about it's not so easy. Yeah, in my experience, a business is a hard thing to build. It takes a lot of effort and it often is much more difficult than you think. I've done a lot of things in my life where I thought it was very easy and I went into it and it was incredibly hard. But luckily I thought it was easy initially because it made me get into it. So it's important, I think, for economy to develop, for us to build things, that you must decide where your passions are and you must go for it. So the important thing is that we don't talk about it, but that we decide, this is my thing, this is my calling, this is what makes me tick, and then you must do it. Because if you've got that, you'll drive through the hard times and actually build something very good. I think in terms of when we talk about oil and gas and oil and the hole in the ground, we're obviously talking about finite resources, and I think our problem often with these things is because the terms are long and we're talking about 20 or 30 years, we get to a point where all of us just start believing that it's going to go on forever. Well, if you think about it, when we know it's going to end from the beginning, and how do we use what we get from a mine, what we get from the oil to build a robust economy around it, whether it's a robust economy in a town or if it is for the whole country. It is that mindset that we have to very intentionally build other things from that revenue and not see it as a golden as a geese that's just going to keep on lying golden eggs for us. The other question was on win-win. I believe win-win is when there's two very good negotiators on both sides of the table and everyone presses very hard, and I think Jose said it well. Both walk away and got less than they wanted to, but they also got enough to be happy. You're probably in a win-win situation, and it's that healthy tension that Steve also mentioned, to put another business, Namibian-owned business in the salt industry, to create that competitive tension where constantly there's a little bit of a push and pull. If you don't have that, if one of the parties are too weak, then it spins out of control.
Yeah, so let me start with win-win. I keep mentioning the NAMDEB deal. I really do believe that was a win-win. The people on the ground might not agree with that because the money didn't get to them. So the real owners probably didn't get their fair share. But certainly between the government and De Beers, I think it was a win-win. And if you look back at it, the benefits to both sides were incredible. At the time, I'm sure we both thought that we were not getting a fair deal, but 29 years later, I think it has turned out like that. Moving to it's not so easy. Of course, De Beers said to us it's not so easy. We said you will process 10% of the diamonds here, and we've had three attempts at it now. Maybe De Beers undermined it, I'm not sure. Maybe government mismanaged the processing plant in Kahuna. And we really wait and see whether Namibia can do any better. But it seemed easy at the time. So far it hasn't worked out. So I think you've got to be realistic. To Jose's point, the entrepreneurial spirit of Namibians must be unleashed. And there are many areas where, of course, we can do better than we've done. Your example of agriculture in the north is a perfect one, where if you'd really brought the right technology and unleashed the entrepreneurial spirit of Namibians, we would have been growing a lot of crops in the green schemes. But instead of that, we went and we said government knows better, and government's going to set up these green schemes, which were destined to fail because there's really no accountability in those green schemes. You appoint structures and general managers and MDs and cars and all of that. It just doesn't work. My family's in the charcoal business, and government has tried many times to sort of create a corporate charcoal industry. It'll fail before it starts. It's that entrepreneurial spirit and risk-taking that you need to really get this thing going. So we've got to do that, and we've got to make it easier to query question of, is the policy right? In the general business environment, I think the policy is completely wrong. We stifle small business. We make it so difficult for anybody to do business. IPDB will tell you, there's a whole raft of regulations which anybody, foreign investor or local investor, have to get through. And it's damn difficult to do business. So we need to deregulate and really get that entrepreneurial spirit going, because we can be like India. We can really get people at grassroots level to start doing a lot of the things. When we talk about mining, it's big and it's huge risk and it's huge capital. So I don't think there's any doubt that we need big mining investors, but we need to integrate Namibian value chains into those and we need to have local content, realistic local content. Namibians learn very quickly, by the way. B2Gold went and built a mine in Mali with Namibians. Paladin went and built a mine in Malawi with Namibians. Their response to this story that Namibians aren't skillful is completely contrary. They say Namibians are damn good, and we take them all over the show. In beneficiation, we don't have the skills yet, but you can get there quite quickly if you really have those opportunities. So I think policy in the resources area period were okay. We started out okay, but we've gone off track because we've allowed political motivations to dictate licensing of fishing, of forests, of mining, of oil and gas. And I'm terrified about what's happening in the oil and gas sector now, and in the hydrogen sector, where I think we're doing more of the same. Preferential allocation to politically aligned groups. Preferential procurement is a different story, and we should have rules. But the allocation of licensing and quotas is going completely off track, and we somehow think that we can just do that because these rich resources we found now allow us to do that. We will go out of business very quickly if we don't get proper allocation rules and governance clear.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much. I think on that happy note, I think we're going to draw a line now, or am I pushing my luck? There's one gentleman at the back who would like to ask a question. I didn't really want to go beyond 8 o'clock. I don't know what tradition dictates here. Yes, sir, please. I can hear you. Nothing to take my mic.
Yeah. Once again, good evening. As I said, my name is Victor Kamatuka, and I'm an engineer by profession. I'm more of a practical person. Yeah. I just want to understand, like if you take, for example, Husab as an example in mind, and you're talking about of 70% take and whatever, it's a bit confusing. Can maybe Stephen just break it down, maybe for the last year or the year before that, like if we take $1 and we say that Husab made $1, of that 70%, whatever, which actually came to the Namibian government, is so much, it's 0.7 cents. Or Husab made 100 billion from mining, and when we say 70% take of that amount, it's actually 40 billion which came into the government coffers. Just a practical example for me to take home. Sorry for picking on Husab, but it's, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'll shock you with this number, it's public now. Last year, Husab made a loss of 2.9 billion. So the way mines work is they spend a whole lot of money up front. They paid $2 billion for that mine when they bought it from the Australian company. So that was their input cost. They then spent about another $3 billion. So they're at $5 billion. And the way our tax system works is that they can deduct those expenses into their life of mine when they start making a profit. So they don't pay tax for a long time until they recover their input costs. They don't pay tax. And in year 3 or whatever, 4, full production now, they're making a 2.9 billion loss. Now, if I was the minister, I would be saying, why are you making a 2.9 billion loss when the mine next door to you is making a significant profit? So I'd be asking those questions to see whether they are transfer pricing or not. When we talk about the government take, it's over the life of the mine, and it's royalties which they pay from day one. So if I sell $100 of uranium, I pay $3 of royalty to government, whether I make a profit or not. So that's the first. Then there's an export duty on some minerals, and then there's the taxes once you get into a taxable position. So the example I was giving you of De Beers Namdeb, 75% plus, was in a mature mine that obviously deducted all their capital costs, and it was a running mine making significant profit. So in that case, it's the 55.2% tax on profits, it's a 10% export duty, and then once the government became a shareholder, it's the 50% dividend as well. Now if you add all of those up, let's say of the free cash in that operating mine, government got 75% and De Beers got 25%. In the case of Husab, it's going to take a very long time before government gets it. Anything except that royalty. Epangelo negotiated a 10% share in that mine, but they borrowed the money at a very expensive rate. So they are not going to get any dividends out of that operation for a long time, if ever. So the government take there is not going to be that significant. And that's why I say it was a very bad investment to go in there. They should rather have upped the royalty, negotiated a higher royalty, for example, so that they get something out of it. So, you know, that's an unfortunate example to quote Husab, because it's not going to make a profit for a while. And that's why government should be much more discriminating and not go and take equity in companies that are not going to make a profit. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, thank you. So, are those not the things that someone should advise our government?
Absolutely.
Definitely, if you have a strategy, what do you amend?
Absolutely.
These are kind of things that you will be taking.
So query, right now on hydrogen, I've done a few interviews on hydrogen. And my advice was, the debate was, should government get free equity? My advice is no, they shouldn't, because any investor coming in, knowing that somebody is taking 25% for free, has to get much higher returns on their investment, and because of that they are less competitive in the global market. So my advice is no, don't take 24% free, because you're going to make this investment unviable for the investors. On the other side, should government borrow money to buy 24%? My answer again is no. You don't know what that thing's worth. You don't know if it's viable. There's no feasibility study yet. So on both counts, the answer is no. What government can do as the licensor and as the owner of some of these resources is take an option to say, if this thing works, then we want an option as a licensing condition to buy or take or whatever so much percent. But it's a trade-off between owning equity and getting the resource rents through the royalties, the taxes and all that. It's a package deal. And I think all of this hype around the hydrogen now is going to cost us very dearly, especially if we borrow money for an unknown resource.
Can I just a quick comment on when we keep on mentioning transfer pricing, and I know it's a strange concept. So transfer pricing, and why Steve says if a company is making a loss, we should investigate whether there's a transfer pricing problem. So what transfer pricing talks about is if you have a related party, so a Namibian mine sells their uranium to a related party somewhere else, and you do it at an increased price. So then the result is that the Namibian entity do it at a lower price, so the Namibian entity doesn't make profit, or the other way around, inflate costs and take it out. So you basically shift the profit to another tax jurisdiction. And transfer pricing is, and all of this, to make sure that the government gets our portion of income tax on profit, we have to make sure that the shifting of profits hasn't taken place. So it's a very important area that we need to pay attention on. And yeah, I think the Revenue Authority, we haven't had enough resources on it. So it is a real area of focus at the moment, where a whole group of people are being trained, and there's also international consultants that are now helping Namra on transfer pricing.
Okay, yeah, you shouldn't have done that, Hugo.
I just quickly want to raise a point that I think people forget all the time. When the government says we are putting money into this, it's not government's money, it's your money. And whether you're a registered taxpayer or not, you're still paying VAT on the loaf of bread. It's not government's money, it's your money. So you should all be jumping up and down every time government says government's going to put money into this risk or that thing or that thing. People forget, it's your money. Make a noise.
Okay, on that.
If I can just add,
It's just the ways of dominating
it's
now.
just as bad to borrow the money, because it's future generations that are going to have to pay that money back.
Okay, we've got. Now I'm gonna allow one more question for the lady there who can't contain herself.
Hello, not because Claire just figured it. So, I would like to ask, how do we amplify all this wonderful, comments that we produced tonight? Is it time for protest action? Like liaising with the media, ensuring that once a week, twice a week, we'll have an article on what the community, we, as the 29ers have to say. Because we cannot stop here. I really believe we now need to go beyond this venue with these voices, because it is too valuable for it not to go beyond it. So yeah, maybe many people are put off by the word protest action, but it's based on well-reasoned discussions and research, and I really think we need to go forward, because we're far too nice, I think, and we need to make a noise, as Claire's just said. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. That's also a policy issue for the 29ers, I think, if they want to start publishing an annual, a weekly article in the newspapers or something. I think that's a very interesting idea. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up now, sorry. I'm not going to allow any more questions, not even from the Galloways. And I'm not going to start the issue of fishing, I'm afraid, because I'm just busy reading this fish rock book published by the Namibian. It's absolutely fascinating. It's better than my book, I can say. It reveals a lot more than my book does, and it's half the price too. So I'm plugging someone else's book now. I'd just like to thank you for coming out on a cold winter's day, for listening to us. I think I've learned a lot. It's been absolutely fascinating. I think we could go on and on. We'll probably have another session in the coming months on natural resource governance. It's the big question. We didn't talk about Guyana at all, so all my slotting up on Guyana was for nothing. But it is a very interesting case study. There's no shortage of interesting case studies around the world that we can learn from. No doubt about that. Anyway, thank you very much, and see you again at the next session. Bye.